Hey guys, it's Alex with Hammond Watch. I'm here today with the Oris TT1, the most affordable sports watch you can buy from Oris, brand new, and not buying from Oris directly, obviously, but going through the gray market. And I like the Oris product, but I've always struggled with them as a brand. You know, if I'm going to pay $1,500, $2,000 for a watch, it's kind of a crowded section of the market. You know, that's when you start looking at some used luxury pieces from, you know, like some older Omegas or maybe even some closer to modern Breitling watches. And you get a lot of name cachet. And it's not always all about name cachet, but at certain price points, you're dealing with watch companies that provide it where you don't. So you do need to have a superior product. And in general, I think Oris does a good job with their finishing. I don't know if it's a company that I'm willing to drop $2,000, $3,000 on a watch for. That said, these watches kind of widely across the gray market sell in the $680 to $700 range, and that's, I mean, WatchMax, Joma Shop, World of Watches, you know, they're all right around that same price point. And I saw this on eBay. It was through WatchMax's listing, and it had a best offer on it. I threw out $580 expecting to get declined, and when I got declined, my plan was to then reach out to them independently and say, hey, you know, whatever their offer was, be like, look, minus all the fees, this is going to be the price point, let's make a deal. Unfortunately, or fortunately, they went ahead and accepted $580, which I had no problem paying to get it in person and have a look at. And after spending a few days with it, my feelings are still just a tiny bit mixed. The overall sizing on the watch is really nice. You know, you have a 42 millimeter case. The lug to lug is 49 millimeters. You have a thickness of 12.1, and then a 7 millimeter crown, which is really kind of a highlight and a low light of the watch. It's a highlight because it's extremely sharp, grippy, and well finished. You can see engraved Oris. Then you have these really nice cutouts and even have some serrations on the high marks, giving you phenomenal grip. It really is nice to operate. But it's a low light because when you put it on and wear it around it, and I wear my watches just a little bit loose because in general I deal with some puffiness. You know, I live in Florida, it gets hot, I like beers, you know, you tend to get a little bit of swelling. So I wear them a little bit loose to make up for any variances in my skin. So as it kind of droops itself down, all of that sharp, you know, well executed gripping kind of gets into your hand a little bit. And I love watches without crown guards. Like, let's be clear. My Datejust doesn't have crown guards. My Super Ocean doesn't have crown guards. My Escapement Time doesn't have crown guards. Like, I love watches that don't have them. But they all have a softer finish to the crown, and I don't notice it as much. With this watch, I do kind of feel it kind of cutting in a little bit. Not wildly uncomfortable, but absolutely something to note, and it was a tiny bit disappointing. Another thing that's typically brought up with Oris watches is the lug gap. Now, I don't mind sacrificing strap options for a well-executed bracelet, and Oris really does a nice job with their bracelets. The finishing is really nice, high quality. The polishing looks really nice. And when I say finishing is high quality, it's incredibly uniform. It's very much in the vein of a luxury watch, and it has like a satin feel to it. It's so nice. You don't really get that until you start really paying up a premium. And being able to pick this watch up around $600, that's a really nice aspect of the whole thing. The lug width here is 12 millimeters, but the strap itself flares out closer to 24. I measured it at 23.8. Then it tapers down really nicely to 18 millimeters, and then you're back up to 20.3 for this buckle. It's a 2-button deployant, really nice milled hardware. I love that it is not bulky at all. I mean, the total height here is 6.5 millimeters for the entire section. I think that is great. You know, you don't have any diver's extensions. You're a little bit limited with only 3 micro adjusts. But just for perspective, I mean, the crown is 7 millimeters. This is smaller than this, and it might not seem that way, but I assure you I've measured both and that's the case. So this bracelet is incredibly comfortable. Something that I found really interesting, and it's not necessarily the movement, but how they executed it in this watch. The day wheel itself, where you would normally have a second language, is blank. So if you wanted to run the watch with that blacked out, just showing the date, that is absolutely up to you. I don't hate it. I think that's kind of a cool feature. Obviously, you're still going to have that box there, and you'll know it's there. And on a watch finished to this caliber, maybe that bothers you. But in general, I think it's pretty cool that they didn't try to force a second language in there. And it really doesn't take away from the functionality of the date switching over, which is really nice and instant. Oris's big selling point is their finish work, and I absolutely see why. I mean, the brushing on these indices is phenomenal. The polishing is well executed, very playful in the light. But just look at the edge where the two finishes meet. Like, incredibly crisp, very much in line with a luxury premium product. So I absolutely understand why guys love these so much. The dial is very crisp. The printing of the seconds track is nice. And then the hands are really well executed. You have a little bit of shakiness to the black paint that is in the lower half of the hands, especially on the hour. But in general, even on $2,000–$3,000 watches, if you get in tight with a really nice lens, you're going to see those little bit of inconsistency. It's not until you get into like a bit of a higher price point outside of the entry level of luxury that you really start to see full perfection. And I think for what Oris charges for their watches, they really do kind of fit the bill. I also really like this pop of blue in the seconds hand. Not really anything to do with their finish work outside of the painting being really well executed. But overall, they do make an attractive watch. The lume application, while minimal, is pretty strong. It's a little bit tricky to film, but you have a dot at each index as well as the hands loomed. I really appreciate that they also did the tip of the seconds hand. That's always a really nice touch. So here we are on my 7.5 to 7 3/4 inch wrist. As I mentioned earlier, outside of that crown getting a little bit aggressive on your hand, the watch fits wonderfully. I thought the bracelet, once I got it in person, may not hold the watch head in place. It's a pretty substantial watch, and having integrated lugs, I was just curious how it would fit. But it sits very, very well. No hair pulling, very nice against the skin. One other thing I wanted to touch on with the bracelet real quick. The clasp, to me, doesn't make sense. I think they did a bang-up job on all of this bracelet, but everything on this watch is two finishes. Brush, polish, polished, brush, polished. There's a lot of shine to the crystal and the indices themselves. And then they went with a fully brushed clasp. And I understand if people are going to argue, well, it's going to get scratched up, so you'd rather have a brushed surface. But this is all going to get scratched up too. I think this would have been a little bit more cohesive if they polished the sides or the pushers or maybe this loop around. This is the only part of the finishing to me that feels like it was a little bit cost saving. Like maybe it was just a little bit easier to just leave that brushed. But it's a really small complaint for what is overall, I think, a really attractive watch. So is the Oris TT1 worth it? Yes and no. The retail price, absolutely not. At the market corrected, kind of gray market price of $650, $700, probably. Sub $600, yes. Go in, make some lowball offers. If you can pick one of these up for $580 like I did, more power to you. I think it's absolutely worth it at that price point. When you start looking around at what you get from Certina or Tissot or Mito or any of those companies, when you spend $500, you'll get a similar set of specifications, but you do not get the finish work that you get with Oris. It really does set them apart in that particular kind of competition. That said, I've seen Oris compared to Omega and Grand Seiko even at times. That's nonsense. They do a really good job. It's really sharp. You can say some features maybe remind you of those watches, but the level of finishing that Omega's putting out is superior to this. And you have to go apples to apples. Like a low-end Omega might not be finished to the quality of a really high-end Oris, but this kind of lower-end Oris versus a lower-end Omega, they're not competing watches by any stretch. You know, what I think Oris does is they found a niche where they're putting together a really nice watch with decent specs, a lot like Tag Heuer does, and then they're undercutting them on price and providing a better finish. You know, in the two brands, I think I compared them the most to each other because one, Oris, is putting more work into the actual finishing of the product, while Tag is putting more into the branding to give you name cachet. And I think that I prefer Oris to Tag in general for that. But when you start looking at higher end Oris watches and you're paying $2,000 for a diver, I struggle with that, knowing that I could buy a box and papers, really good condition Breitling for that same money, and get a brand that I really do respect and enjoy wearing. So, I mean, it's going to come down a lot to personal preference. If you have an Oris, or you know of Oris that you think would change my mind as far as its finishing being on par with an Omega or a Grand Seiko, you know, hit me in the comments and let me know what it is. You know, I've experienced the Aquis, I've experienced the TT1, their vintage diver, I think it's a 65, all really nice watches, just nothing that's made me feel like, you know, they're really knocking it out of the park like a company like Omega. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed today's video. It really helps out in YouTube's algorithm. Also, consider subscribing. You know, I'm putting out watch content about 2 to 3 times a week right now, and I hope to see you in the next one.